Hello everyone, this is 𝗂𝗂𝗄𝗧 and welcome to Legacy Links. This series is about bridging eras. Each episode links a historical figure from Luxembourg's past to someone working in the same field today. Together, they reveal how legacy, identity, and place continue to shape who we are and who we are becoming. What's up everyone, this is 𝗂𝗂𝗄𝗧 and in this Legacy Links episode we are establishing a link between Marguerite Thomas-Clement and PATRICIA SOUZA. Marguerite Thomas-Clement was one of the Luxembourg's first female political voices, known for her tireless advocacy for women's rights, social justice and equality in an era when women had virtually no presence in public life. She helped lay the groundwork for gender equity in Luxembourg through her involvement in politics, writing, and activism. PATRICIA SOUZA, a modern champion of equity and inclusion, continues this legacy by leading programs that empower women and underrepresented groups to find their voice in the workplace and also right here in Luxembourg. PATRICIA is shaping a more inclusive future where human experience is central to how we work. Both women, separated by a century, reflect a powerful through line of challenging the status quo and reshaping social norms. PATRICIA, thank you very much for being here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Julia, for the invitation. I'm really thrilled to be here, especially to be represented or compared in a different 100 years, but with Marguerite.
I think it would make more sense to start with your own personal story and the personal drive that you have behind the advocacy.
Of course.
So Marguerite faced resistance from both men and women as she tried to bring feminist ideas into the political mainstream. What inspired you to focus your career and volunteering efforts on inclusion work, and have you faced any pushback or misunderstanding along the way?
That's a very interesting question. Interesting in the sense that it resonates to what she experienced, because what really inspired me to restart the work with inclusion was indeed the resistance I faced. So for those that don't know me, I'm originally Brazilian, also now I'm Luxembourgish, and I worked 5 years in Brazil, then I was assigned to Germany, and eventually I came to Luxembourg in 2018. And having these three cultural experiences and environment experiences helped me to build my journey. But it was only in Luxembourg that it was very clear to me that I was different. Meaning, in Brazil, of course, I was part of the majority and the privileged majority as a white-looking Latina. In Germany, I always felt very welcomed, especially as a white-looking Latina, pretty much German-looking Latina, with all the biases that this entail, but I was also speaking German, so I was very well integrated into society, and I always felt I belonged. That was not the case when I arrived in Luxembourg, and even though I could speak, and I still can, of course, speak German, and now I can speak also Luxembourgish, I couldn't speak French when I came, even though this was very clear, and I made it very clear in my interview process, but I landed in a team of 90% French speakers and native French speakers, and all of my managers were men. And
white men.
Yeah, there was only one brown skin, but it's still French. But indeed, from 6 individuals, there were 5 white-looking French male. And one of the sentences I heard recently after I joined this team, when I think it was a couple of months after I started, was, you know that you were exotic for us, right? And my background is, first I studied biology and eventually I found myself in business, so I finished administration. And for a biologist, when you think about an exotic species, is an invasive species, is that species that actually endangered the system. And that was the first thing that I thought. And I said, whom am I exotic for? I mean, I am white looking, not that this is an advantage, but this is a huge privilege. I have green eyes, I have blonde hair. For other Latina women, Black women, and other underrepresented, or women from underrepresented groups that have heard that before, it's not very pleasant, right? It's not even a microaggression, it's an aggression for itself. And I have discussed that a lot. I even went for, I had a keynote speech at Amazon for the Black Employees Network, and I started my speech using this sentence. And to start using the sentence, I started also researching about it. And it's incredible the amount of Black, brown skin and Latinx women that hear these sort of things. And as I said before, if I am exotic, whom am I exotic for? And what does that mean about you? So you are not exotic, but I am. Why? Right? Because for me, you're also exotic because you're French. I mean, and we have a lot of memes as Brazilians about French culture. So being exotic is one of the most clear signs of a privilege that one holds and is imposing onto someone else. Because, yeah, if you are as a French, you go to Brazil, so that means you're exotic for me then.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. And those experiences, they shaped me. Of course, it was not very easy to experience them when you were living them because I didn't have any knowledge and technical knowledge, especially in inclusion. So you basically just feel those aggressions until a point that either you break or a flight, fight, freeze, right? Mode. And for me, I am always very based and bound by science. So the escape or the flight mode for me was to understand the reasons for that in science. And that's when I started finding out inclusion as an option or business option and also an explanation for everything that I was experiencing. And I have been always a high performer. I have always been a high achiever. And it's even very difficult for many people to understand that this is my normal me. As a high performer, I was not understanding why. I was performing more than all of my peers, but I was the one not being promoted. I was the one not being recognized. And that's when you start finding the explanations in science. And so that was basically my inspiration to start building and shifting my career into inclusion and belonging, to studying about it. As I said, I'm very bound by science. So I need to have data. I need to have clear numbers, not just because I think or there is a trend.
I was wondering if you were saying about being exotic. Did you have a conversation with one of those people or all of them that gave you that comment or comments, how they defined it, whether they're positive or negative or somewhere in between?
I never had the chance because back then, as I said, I didn't have this knowledge, right? I didn't have this clarity. Since I have been using this sentence and this quote, especially many French speakers, they say this, in the French language, this is normal. And I said, but normal for who? So it's not just a matter of language knowledge, right? And because I'm exotic, because I come from a tropical country or a country that is very different than you, so it means that all of the 198 countries that are not France are exotic for you. Or what does that exactly mean? I never had the chance to exactly discuss with that particular individual, but I have had the chance to discuss with other people, right? Individuals from other culture. And I have heard as a feedback, but I always come with the same. So it means you're exotic for me. Can I say the same? How would you feel? But it's always interesting because then the person doesn't realize that. And it always comes with this facial expression of puzzlement or I don't understand. Yeah, but that's what you're entailing.
Yeah, it comes down to awareness really about people's feelings. That's the basic, I think, the thing that you have to be aware of. And also, perhaps the privilege as well. But what you were saying a bit earlier was that you started talking to people, after those comments were made to you, which makes me think, did you find refuge in maybe someone who was higher up or your immediate colleagues, your team, or someone who you considered maybe as a mentor?
I was very lucky to have had great leaders throughout my career. If I go back 20 years, when I was still working for the German Chamber of Commerce, there was the general manager of the chamber, a German man, very introvert, very shy, not exactly the very leaderish representation. And soon after came Deborah, which is something I admired. Very transparent, very honest, very assertive woman. So I was very lucky to have, in my first years of corporate culture, if we can put it that way, even though it was a small organization, 2 women. So I had Deborah and I had Cassiana as my direct manager. Both of them very authentic. They were always giving me the autonomy I wanted, but also very candid feedbacks when also needed, which helped me grow. And the examples I had of women leaders were always extremely powerful. Fast forward to EY, my first senior manager was also a woman, someone that I still have ties until today, and we refer each other for businesses. So the strong characters I had and personalities in the beginning of my career were always women. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. When I came to Luxembourg, I also worked with women leaders, but I didn't have the exact same luck, I would say. But this is part of the patriarchal system, right? The fact that I'm a woman doesn't make me not sexist. The fact that I may be Black doesn't make me non-racist. We are raised and grown in patriarchal and racist societies. So unfortunately, most of us don't manage to come out of the chains and get awareness of that. But I was also very lucky to be led in this inclusion journey by a Black woman partner, which was the most amazing partner I have ever had and role model, and also a brown-skinned male partner. Both of them were, in my recent years of career, the biggest mentors I could have, and very challenging. And I need challenging leaders, right? Every person and every individual are different. I need people that challenge me because, like I said, I'm very fast, so I'm very high-paced. I need leaders that really challenge me, and those two were and I hold them very near to my heart whenever I have any ideas or things. And they're very high position in Big Fours, so I always go and reach out to them. So I have been very lucky. We cannot say that, or one cannot say that in 20 years of career, we only have great leaders, right? Of course, I had very bad leaders. But the good part of it is that from the great leaders, we go further. And from the bad leaders, we know what we should not be. That was the lessons for me.
When you switched to exploring the D&I, diversity and inclusion sphere as something to you transition to you and working full-time after, because you used to be a tax consultant.
Correct.
Voilà.
Tax advisor.
Tax advisor. How did it make you feel? What the culture perhaps of the sphere was? And what I mean by that is efforts like that. And if we look back at what Margaret was doing and how she was operating, it all came to fruition in the year of 1918. And this is when women were granted the right to vote effectively. And she became the first woman in parliament in Luxembourg. Everything that she was doing was very, breakthrough and revolutionary, and people were not used to that, both men and women. And all her efforts and the efforts of fellow women activists, they took a lot of time, and the progress was very slow. And from what I can say, fast forward 100 years now, still we are far from the true equality and equity. And obviously, when you are in this fight for life, and when you do not see the results of your labor, of your work, well, immediately, once you've, you know how it is in the workplace or with anything that you do, you have a task, you complete it, you have the result. Here, this is not the case. And a lot of people face burnout, and it makes them think that all of that is in vain because very often there is no light at the end of the tunnel. Have you, over the course of now, 7, 8 years, felt like that? And what keeps you going, I think? That is the question.
Not exactly with or because of diversity, equity, inclusion. I have been more observer in the past years around the environment, though. But your question could be broken in several aspects. So first, I will go back to one of these leaders that I had that we were just discussing. And one of the biggest lessons I got from her, because in the beginning of my journey with inclusion, I would constantly caught myself angry with the answers or the results I was getting. And it was for me like, this is revoltant, right? And we had a situation where, unfortunately, we're not being able to move along our efforts towards LGBT. And her capacity to navigate politics was something that was beyond my understanding. And one of the situations where she explained, she went to this group of very privileged people and she asked, what does success look like to you then? And she always told me, Patricia, we need to learn how to pick up the battles we want. You cannot win the war if you try to win all of the battles. And those were some of the biggest lessons I had, that you cannot fight the whole system. Because the system, first of all, the status quo protects itself, regardless of gender, regardless of color. I mean, the system has been working, right? At least for the privileged group. And the privileged group is the majority, whereas you are. So if you are in the Black majority community, so Black is going to be part of the privilege. If you're in a white majority community, white is going to be part of the privilege. And as human beings, our whole history comes across power play, right? And oppression. That's just who we are as animals. And that's why we need to pick up our battles. One of the biggest lessons for me was also to change and transform this anger towards compassion and understand that exactly because we're part of patriarchal systems, people don't do that because they're mean. They're just ignorance. Ignorance in the sense that they ignore those facts. They are unaware of their own biases. And this is actually very sad. Not something to feel angry about, but to feel sad for them. And I started coming from a place of anger to compassion and understand that, yeah, if your woman is that sexist, I can only feel sorry for you because I can put all of the numbers in front of you. But if you are unaware of your biases, you are going to refuse each one of them. And that was the second biggest lesson. So first is choose your battles wisely. Second is try to remove anger. It can be a very important boost and motivator to action, but it doesn't help us to make smart decisions. And then to your direct question, whether I felt burnout or I had any issues in this journey, not because of D&I, but that was my boost to go to D&I. Because of the whole biases that I was facing, that was my inspiration, as I said before. That was my drive towards this journey. And as the more one studies about it and sees the data, the more ones understand how difficult it is. So you mentioned that it was in 1918 that the women had the right to vote. So it was in 1967 that women in Switzerland had the right to vote. It was, I think, 2024 that women in Saudi Arabia had the right to ride a car and drive by themselves. 1918 was for Margaret. But what about the other 190 countries in the world? Is this the same situation? Why do we talk so much about a gender gap in STEM in the white European countries, but you don't talk about that in Indian countries, for example, or in countries that are from Muslim backgrounds? Because in those countries, women studying STEM and STEM careers are perceived as girly stuff. And that's exactly how women started their journeys in STEM in the US, for example. If you go back to the 60s, and there are very interesting movies about it, the first women working in NASA were the women working in programming, because those were considered girly jobs. Because they were jobs in offices. They were not using muscles, or at least brain muscle, but not other body's muscles. And eventually men decided that, okay, no, this is a job for men, so women should not be there. Yeah, it's a very long journey. We are very, very far from progress. But once you start working with diversity and inclusion, especially if you have technical background on it, what always helped me to not get frustrated about it. Because one of the main issues we currently have in inclusion, especially and diversity efforts, and one of the reasons why we inclusion experts have been discussing about the decline of DEI, so the classic DEI must die, is because once they put in the agenda the S from ESG, the social part that kind of put DI in the middle and created this fruit salad, companies were, how am I going to put back in place a program of diversity and inclusion if I didn't even know what it is? And what they have this brilliant idea was, let's put people from minorities to lead those programs, people that didn't have any background on it. So instead of looking for solutions, those people started focusing on problems. And that really kind of reduced the impact of inclusion and the capacity to spread as an impactful movement, right? So that's the very difficult stage where DEI is in right now. That's why also I mentioned I have been in a very observer mode recently of everything that is going around the world and this kind of extremist wing initiatives and movements that we are going in several countries, unfortunately, in the removal of several rights that we used to have. Maybe DI needs to die so that things that are more based on science and more impactful are able to leave. So far, I have not burned out because of DI. I have burned out because of people pushing me to lower my bar because of my drive. And, well, I guess the lack of the same drivers in other people working in this sphere, or people without any clue what DI is and promoting themselves like DI experts, or women that have never worked with gender equality before promoting themselves as women empowerists. Negative marketing around DI, right? People that are not qualified and working in the field. Minorities that are using their minority background to promote themselves, that are also creating this polarization. It's women against men when it should not be the case. And then you have the huge majority, right? The 80% of people that don't need to think about DI because they're already sitting in the majority in privileged positions. Think, okay, let them fight. I mean, system is here. System is safe. But one needs to be aware that and that was a very recent discussion I had with global DI leaders. Once you start working with systems of oppression and against the status quo, we need to know that the system is going to protect itself. As long as you're aware of that, it's going to be very difficult that you're going to burn out because you are in the middle of war. So don't try to come with a rose and think, you're going to be intact afterwards.
We had this conversation before as well, that you need to replace anger with compassion. Very difficult, especially for some of us, right? I mean, can you give me an approximate at least time span of how much time it took you? Because it takes an enormous, self-awareness as well, and like being able to center yourself, being able to calm yourself down, and kind of zoom out, show you. And in the moment, if you do not possess the skill of, I guess, recalibrating, on the spot, because in most of those cases, you're having a conversation with a person who does not, hold the same beliefs as you do, right? And on the spot, it can be particularly difficult to do that. Do you have any tips, perhaps? Or you can start with this, how much time it took you first, and then the tips.
One of the frameworks we used to have as inclusion experts when especially I was a consultant at EY, we had what we called the DI continuum, which was a matrix of how to start a journey on DI for companies. And we always said, we know where we're starting. We never know where it's going to end because it's not something like a project, right? DI is not something that, hey, today I have 5 women, tomorrow I'm going to have 50. No, it depends. So basically, DI work is a work of diplomacy because it's about you as an expert holding the data, influencing all of the other departments, why it's important for them also to believe in that. That's part of the continuum. So it's very difficult to estimate a timeline because one knows where it starts. There is no end journey. For me, I have started my scientific journey towards DI back in 2019. I did a master in positive psychology, so to know how to be grateful for things, forgiveness, to work in forgiveness, those are science currently, and they are accepted as science. And mindfulness also helps to regulate emotions. And clarity of data, right? Because once I got the scientific clarity of most of the things that go around, it became much easier for me to detach and to understand, okay, this person is really attacking me personally, but it's because they are having their amygdala screaming to them that I am a threat because I'm just from another gender, but this is not something that this person is doing consciously. Raising questions sometimes helps, like, why are you so angry right now? Sometimes it can go the other way around, but there are some tools and techniques that one can use, like non-communication violence or coaching, learn how to lower down emotions, but also awareness of its own emotions. And I'm not saying that it's easy because if I would known how to master that, probably I would be rich, which I'm not. And I have been into discussions where it was even, I was feeling my whole body, like my stomach reacting to it. I was feeling my emotions going up because you hear the amount of things that for me as a woman, as a Latina, is absurd. But you just need to understand, okay, this person is coming from a place of so much privilege that it's completely unaware what is going on outside. So it's very difficult, and I wish I had the answer, but this is an individual journey, right? Every person, and also it depends on the level of aggressions that one suffered and the level of discrimination, because my main pillars are gender and LGBT. And even as a person that have been studying quite a lot about LGBT, I don't feel comfortable, for example, speaking about it. I have never experienced the sort of discrimination that people from the LGBT community suffer. And I have a very good friend of mine that was one of my inspirations to study LGBT. And I used to take him in all of the meetings with me. And he said, but Pachi, I mean, you were super aware of what you're doing. And I said, yeah, but I will never know what the pain is that you hold as a gay man. This is not the sort of discrimination I have faced. It's every individual has their different journeys.
Yeah, unfortunately. We've been talking about the inclusion in general, but specifically you have the expertise of perhaps bringing it to the workplace, right? So Margaret, for example, her activism was rooted in the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of gender and their class. And in the corporate context specifically, we're here in Luxembourg, and most of the companies here are big corporations. How do we define and frame belonging? And how do we help people who are perhaps D&I professionals within those corporations create it?
So when I was talking about DI should die or not, belonging and psychological safety, for example, as I said, I have been in a place of observation. And this is also what I have been seeing from other DI experts. A lot of companies are merging inclusion or DI efforts towards leadership development, belonging, or well-being. And if we go for the theory first, belonging is this capacity, it's very close to psychological safety, that I can raise my voice without the fear of judgment, right? That I belong to something, that I'm part of this group. I feel that I am not an outlier. I am part of them. And I would not be judged or discriminated against because of that. So some of the works we did, and inclusion is very much connected to belonging. But what is very nice is that it's not difficult at all. It just needs awareness. For example, one of the programs we had back then at EY was 30 days of good practice, something like this. And there were 30 tips for people to become or be more inclusive towards their colleagues and create a belonging environment. So, for example, one tip was say good morning to every person you see. I mean, a very easy things, right? Say good morning to people, or when you bump into each other at the lift, ask them how their day is doing. Third tip was try to connect with one different person in your workplace per day or per week, whatever the KPI for each person is, and go for a coffee. And instead of only talking about work matters, ask this person genuinely who they are. So those are very easy and practical tips. And I took this, it was a quest at the time. And I kind of tried to tick all of the boxes, right? Try to say good morning. And even though it's very easy and practical, it's also very difficult sometimes to remember of those little drops of kindness, as I said, in our tough journeys, in our tough agendas, in a world where time is money. So maybe if I am taking my time to tell you good morning, I'm not taking the time to send an email. So it's really about priority. Will it really matter if I don't take 5 seconds of my day to say good morning to people, right? Or is it really more important than sending that stupid email that I had to send? It's a matter of priority, right? And coming from a place of individualism to collectivism, which is not necessarily easy because we come from very different cultures and every culture has their own cultural codes, right? So we need to think, okay, if I am taking 5 minutes of my day to go for a coffee and listen to someone, that means I will have 5 minutes less of my own work. Yes. Is it going to be that different in your whole life? But it can mean the whole life for that person. But it's a daily journey, right? It's a daily journey of remembering of that, of reminding of this, of saying I'm sorry while really meaning sorry. And not just, hey, sorry. No, but really truly apologizing, really using what we say nonviolent communication, which is like, hey, I am not feeling okay with what you just said. So there are several techniques that one can use. They're not difficult at all, but they require something that is awareness. Awareness requires, if we go towards biology now and science, awareness requires energy. And energy requires us as human beings to bring our attention to our prefrontal cortex. And this is not something we normally want to do.
This is science.
Yeah, this is science.
No, but I like that it's becoming a public science, to be honest, like especially everything that's related to the prefrontal cortex. And the latest thing that I read, I think, it's that it develops fully only by the age of 25, and people with ADHD by the age of 33 or 35. But I actually had two, I guess, points to make here or questions to ask you about. The first was about belonging specifically in relation to women in male-dominated fields. So we come from STEM here. Personally, what I witness is that regardless of the fact that organizations do want to, technical organizations or departments do want to diversify their workforce by bringing more women, what I do notice though is that those offices or the environments, really, what I mean is the environments are not really ready to welcome those women. And I judged against a variety of different aspects. I just wanted to see what your point of view on that particular matter is. Like when you would like to attract, doesn't need to be just women, the representatives of
diverse candidates.
Yeah, diverse candidates of the underrepresented groups. And you want to do that, but then you are not ready to welcome them.
Well, unfortunately, I do agree that happens a lot because, as I said, I mean, a lot of companies started thinking and realizing that DEI was important when it became part of the ESG agenda. Not that this was necessarily good. And they had to create KPIs about it. So what companies started saying is like, hey, we are hiring 50-50. So this is happening every day. Companies kind of brag that in their entry levels, they are kind of 50-50. But then when you look at the top layers, they're kind of 90-10. And they never mention about that. So they always discuss about the overall numbers, right? Because that's the thing about KPIs and numbers. We have a saying that we squeeze them until they kind of give us what we want to hear. So that happens all of the time. That is the part where we say or we mention tokenism around inclusion. Tokenism is, for example, when I do an International Women's Day just to say, hey, we celebrate International Women's Day. You don't actually leave that. You don't actually do any other action towards inclusion for gender, but you are there celebrating International Women's Day. This is tokenism.
Yeah.
Right? It's just marketing around. And that's also one of the big problems because it happens all of the time. It's like gender washing, greenwashing. I mean, you have all of these washing things. So yes, that happens all of the time. 2, in Luxembourg, again, it happens all of the time. Every time I have ever heard around DEI in Luxembourg, I have heard companies bragging, yes, we have 80 nationalities in our company. Yes, we have 60 nationalities in our company. Yes, we have 13 different language speakers in our country. Is this really something to be bragging about? I mean, don't we live in a country where 50% are foreigners by default? It's not something you should be bragging about. It's the same that me in Brazil saying, yeah, we have the most diverse country cultural in the world. This is a fact. There's not something to be brag about. And this single data of Brazil brings a very bad history of slavery, of colonization. So yes, we are the most diverse country in the world. What do we do about that is what matters. So we shouldn't be bragging about diversity whatsoever. We should be taking practices around inclusion. And I would like to share one story. I think it was 5 years ago, I had a keynote to SAP. I have a good friend of mine that works for SAP in Brazil, and she says, Patricia, I'm mesmerized about your journey. Would you be willing to talk to us? And I invited another experienced professional that was working at EY at the time with disability. And we were doing this keynote together. And I was explaining what the difference between diversity and inclusion is. And my example was that for me, diversity was like having an aquarium and putting all of the most different colorful fishes that you can find in the sea in one same aquarium. You take tropical fishes from Brazil, Mediterranean Sea, and so on. And you expect them to live having the same pH without any special treatment of that water. They were all going to die. that was a very nice example I used to use around diversity. And this colleague, he said, diversity and inclusion is like trying to bake a cake and putting all of the ingredients in the mixer. For example, the egg with the shell, the flour with the pack, and expecting that you're going to bake the most beautiful cake ever. You won't. So that's the thing around diversity without inclusion, right? And in my experience, we shouldn't be even talking about diversity anymore. Because if we're bragging ourselves about diversity, I mean, in which world are we living in? Diversity is a fact. Luckily enough, at least in Luxembourg, we are going to work with other genders. We are going to work with other people from different gender identities or sexual orientations. If we're not having that in our team, I'm sorry, but you as a business person have a problem. If this is not the representation you have in your company right now, you shouldn't be bragging. You should be kind of thinking how your company is even going to survive. Also, what this colleague shared that was, I never forgot. He said once he was nominated for a prize and he had to walk down the aisle and give it this prize or keynote speech. I don't remember exactly. And he limped, right? He has a physical disability. And he was sharing that by the time he stood up and he started walking down the aisle, everybody turned to him and he started seeing the expressions of, is this person really kind of going to do this speech? Really questioning his capacity. And his message was, of course, he got the prize and he delivered the keynote. He said, I wish one day that my qualifications were seen first and before my disability. So this is about inclusion. That's what companies should be talking about. So to your point, for example, I want to attract more women. Very nice. Are you focusing on gender balance? Because we know from data that women are the most caregivers in the world. So they do need flexibility and they do need to normally work flex hours and home office. So do you have any sort of flexibility in your working hours that you allow those women to be caregivers? Or women are working in a male-dominated environment. Do you have any sort of initiatives and team building activities that are working towards including these women, or you're keeping the same old golf club, cigar smoking, cars, speedy cars kind of approach? And I'm talking about gender stereotypes because I'm not saying that women should not be smoking cigar. I smoke cigar. I drink whiskey. But I'm really focusing now on the gender stereotypes that we have in our minds. So are you creating an environment where this woman will not be feeling all of the time as the outlier, but somebody that can really bring value to it? And that's the point that we always talk about representation, right? I mean, we always say why minorities tend to apply for companies where they see themselves represented at the top. And here I'm not only talking about women, I'm talking about Black women mostly, because this is the most underrepresented groups around all of them. I'm talking about Black men, I'm talking about brown-skinned people. So we know, for example, in the US, that the salary gap, the pay gap between, for example, Latinx, Latin women, Black women, and Asian women is different among each other from white women. So, for example, we know for a fact that Asian women earn almost the same than white women, while Black women earn the least. They earn even less than Latin women. And all of this is because of our gender biases. And again, about bragging and numbers and figures, right? It's going to be very polemic what I'm going to say, but recently we saw that Luxembourg removed the gender pay gap, right? But then I leave one single question. How come that we removed the gender pay gap and we still have the most or the biggest gap in the social security systems in Europe? If you don't have any gap in the salaries, you shouldn't be having any gap in the social security payments. So that means that we're just squeezing numbers to show what we want to see. And that is about inclusion.
Getting back to you belonging, I'm thinking that in most cases, unfortunately, speaking from experience and from what I've just heard from fellow women who work in the technical roles surrounded by predominantly non-women, they do not feel like 100% or even perhaps 90% included for a variety of reasons. And obviously, we all find refuge outside work because work also, you luckily do not define who we are. And outside work, you can obviously find refuge in the circle of your friends, your family, your close ones, or different community groups. And for example, thinking back to Margaret, she was one of the founders of several associations, which I, off the top of my head, can't remember the names of, but basically supporting women in whatever that they needed to have the support, like whether that was allowing them to work in the public office, for example. Can you talk to me about the role that the community, specifically beyond the workplace, play in sustaining, well, your personal motivation and then the results that you see in supporting women?
As a Brazilian, that's quite interesting. I think it's because of the several societal issues we have. We are a very altruistic society and very communal society. So doing volunteering work was something that was part of my upbringing and who I am. So actually my first ever paid job was with Greenpeace. I was a volunteer of Greenpeace, and then when I was 17, they got their own volunteers to get membership, so paid membership for them. And one of the main struggles I had when I was in Germany is that for every sort of volunteering I was trying to do or looking for, I needed to have a damn certificate. If I wanted to be part of Red Cross, I had to be certified to be a volunteer of Red Cross, and so on and so forth. So there was a hole in my heart, and I wanted to dedicate my time and give back to society, and that was a time I couldn't. And I was extremely happy when I came to Luxembourg. I saw that I could do that. And the first experience I had, I was walking the dogs and visiting the animals at the Gasperish shelter, 𝗂𝘂𝘃, because I also always had animals and pets in Brazil. And here was the first time I couldn't. And different than Brazil, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm really aware that this is wrong right now, but we always pet other people's dogs in Brazil without asking the tutors, which is completely wrong. But I was always desperate seeing the dogs and pets in the streets, and I could not touch them. Mm-hmm. So it was the first volunteering I did. Then I tried for a long time to start engaging into other organizations that were working with women empowerment, but they were very much French dominated. So I was never given the chance to join, or I was even reaching out to the founders and I was not getting any replies. That was when, back in 2021, I think I joined LEAD Network for the first time. So Leading Executives at Advancing Diversity, which focused on gender equality and empowerment for the FCMG industry. So that was my background with volunteering and why I decided to join those organizations, because I truly believe in the power of community. And not just because I believe, and I need also this feeling of belonging. I needed to feel that I was belonging to the society other than just the work. As you said, the work doesn't define who we are. So I wanted to feel that I was not alone in all of the rooms. And that was the time I saw that it was not just important for me. There were a lot of other minorities out there that were craving connection and belonging needs. And what I saw in this journey is that indeed there is a lot of people out there looking for a place to belong and a place of support and a place where they feel just encouraged and empowered to be themselves, because they're being rejected over and over again for positions they're applying for. Even though they have always thought they were qualified, they're receiving this kind of rural answer from the market, because this is basically a rejection from the market that you are perhaps not qualified as you thought, because this is what comes in our minds. So those communities, they're places of support. That's the way I see it at what we know, right? And it kills me when I hear men especially, or people coming from the privileged groups, saying that women don't support each other, or that this is the main problem in society. I mean, we're talking about 80% of the corporations, they're led by men. They're not led by women. So is it so that women are not supporting each other, or that we don't have allies? And I would like to do a metaphor with 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝑎𝑡ℎ Tale. I don't know if you're familiar with this series. It became very famous series, especially from the US. So 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝑎𝑡ℎ Tale, it's based on a book where actually we are living in a chaotic society where fertility levels drop to lower levels that has never seen before. And extremist religious groups start conceptualizing a new society in the US where they have handmaids that are fertile. And they have the commanders who are the ones who run the society, and their wives who cannot bear any child anymore, and then they have these handmaids to do so. So basically they have rituals where they hold those other women so that their husbands can basically rape them to have their babies. This is a long story, of course, I'm summarizing. And of course, there is a revolution coming up, and a lot of women are joining, and also men are joining to try to save the women, because some of them kind of fled to Canada. This is taking place in the US. So actually, US collapses, and they have this Gilead society. There is this kind of religious-based society run by men, and the women don't have any voice anymore. It's very interesting, the metaphor that this series brings. And even though you have this a huge amount of women joining and gathering, trying to bring down the society, you still have men holding guns. You still have men with more body power. So even if all the women in the world would join, we're 50% of the population, yes, but we still don't have the weapons. We still don't hold the power in society. We still are not politically represented. We are still not 80% of associations and companies. So it kills my soul when I hear men that are sitting in the mostly highest power of privilege saying that women are where we are because we're not supporting each other. I wish the same amount of men that are saying this are the ones that are supporting the women. That's about the power of those communities. Yes, women are supporting each other. Minorities are supporting each other. You have a lot of Black people supporting each other. But let's remember what minorities means. We wouldn't be called underrepresented groups and minority groups if we were well represented and holding the same power and privilege as everybody else. And that's the power that I see in those communities.
It's actually a good segue to you, perhaps the last question. You were saying that the underrepresented groups and the minorities, they do support each other. So within those groups, perhaps even cross groups as well. Intersectionality, exactly. So Margaret, for example, she worked not only to create space for women, but also ensure that their voices were really heard. And she understood that the presence alone was not enough. It's the participation that mattered. And in today's workplace, representation is obvious. It's improving in some areas, but the real influence can still be uneven. What do you think how one should ensure that underrepresented voices are not just included in the room, but actually shape the outcomes?
That's a very good question, but very difficult to answer because it can be broken down again in several points. But one that has been very difficult for me even to realize, it's around giving the room for the people that should be in the room. For example, when I see, and we're just talking about women not supporting each other and men supporting each other. If I am a person holding privilege and I'm aware of that, so for example, if I am a person with a lot of visibility, hypothetically, and I know that I have, for example, I'm a white-looking Latina and I have a brown-looking Latina trying to navigate the journey. It's not about me posting her on my social media so that I can look good, right? It's about me giving her the spotlight to shine. And that's what I have been also seeing a lot, not just other minorities promoting themselves using the fact they're minorities, but also people holding power and privilege using that to promote themselves by supporting minorities. So, for instance, if I would create a group just for Black individuals or brown individuals, I would keep posting pictures of them like, hey, those are my groups, right? And then you post them doing funny faces or funny pictures or funny poses. I'm not giving them the voice. I'm using them to promote myself. And this is the same with panels, with keynotes, and so on. For instance, this keynote I went for Amazon, I was speaking to the Black Employees Network, and it was initially I was thinking, okay, I am not entitled to speak to the Black Employees Network. I'm not a Black person or a Black looking person. And then I realized, okay, I'm a Latina person if I think about that because I'm in Europe. But I started my journey, and I even asked that to the person that invited me, and I was saying, listen, I'm a white looking. Should I be speaking to an audience of Black employees? Are you going to have representation enough? Is it okay if I attend? And she said, no, Patricia, we're going to have a whole panel for the Black Employees Network. And I started opening saying, I know the privilege that I hold by looking white, even though I'm a Latina. So being conscious of our own privilege and the privilege we hold helps a lot. If you see a panel or what the jokes we make are manos, right? A panel that is only made by women. We should not be attending. We're 50% of the population. We should have full representation of ourselves. And the same is, if you see a whole panel made by women, this is not representative either. So why? Why do we need to have a panel made only by women? Because probably we're trying to compensate by all of the other panels that are only made by men. Is this exactly the message we're trying to achieve? Or when you give leadership roles for women that are for people positions, we do have representation. Then when you look at the representation of women, they're holding the positions of marketing or people. Is this really representation? No, I'm sorry to say. Ensuring that underrepresented voices are represented is first and foremost understanding the power and privilege we hold from the position where we are. It's giving their space when they need one, or taking our space when we need to take one. It's ensuring that people boycott panels or events where we as underrepresented groups are not fully represented. Also considering, for example, if I am going to do a mentorship program or whatever program about representation, am I entitled to do a program for Black people? Am I entitled to do a program for brown people? If I am a man, should I be organizing a leadership program for women? I leave those questions because that's understanding of privilege. And when I'm doing something to really support someone or just to give visibility and exploit that. Another situations that I have seen, for instance, was I was in corporate settings and old leaders, old white male were asking the opinions of people, and you have this one young woman starting her career, and then eventually they cut them off and say, thank you for your opinion. And I have seen this happening, and I was amazed by the answer that this woman gave. She said, I answered because you asked my opinion. I think my opinion counts. But we should be aware that this is rare to happen, because as minorities, we never feel included or belonged, or we don't feel psychologically safe enough to raise our voices against the system, against the status quo. And the system will always protect itself. So whenever people make jokes that are accepted in one society or are accepted, for example, between men, when I first came to Luxembourg, I was trying to understand this sort of, and I'm not saying that all the French communicate this way, but this was my micro-environment, right? This was perception I did. And I asked several French-speaking people if it was normal that they were always communicating, it was using passive-aggressive communication style. And they were always using passive-aggressive communication style, using also sexual jokes around. And even me as a Brazilian coming from a very sexist country, very used to make jokes, I was always uncomfortable hearing that. But first, I could not understand French. Second, I was not the majority there, so I didn't want to be the one poking and breaking the bubble. But one day, I stood up for myself and I said, if you want me to feel included, if you want to be empowered, you speak in a language that I can understand. So another situation that happened to me, and again, I feel that I'm an underrepresented group in Luxembourg, right, as a Latina. I was always very clear that I couldn't speak French, so I was very comfortable that I could speak German. But especially in the city, you have a whole majority of service providers speaking French, even though they also speak Portuguese, which is a major advantage for me.
Obviously.
But initially, I would ask, parlez-vous anglais? There were at least 3 times, I clearly remember, these people working at 𝗿𝗁 or at Cactus, looking with me as a face of completely reprehension, say, no. And I was like, do you speak Portuguese? I could speak 4 languages with them. They couldn't speak only one. And they made me feel bad.
But most of them are not Luxembourgish. That's a very important point to make,
But neither was I, right? And that's the power and privilege. If we think about the wheel of privilege, they were still holding some power of privilege around me.
Yeah, that is true.
But why am I saying this? Because I took my Luxembourgish citizenship, and now I speak Luxembourgish. So I had a situation at the hospital in the beginning of the year, and I went to speak to the nurse, and they immediately speak French with me. They never even ask you, right? They come to a place of privilege that you're obviously speaking French with me in a country where you have 50% of foreigners. And then I started trying to communicate, and I am B2 in French, but I got some blockage in my brain. And then eventually I decided, okay, I'm not going to discuss about my health in a language that I cannot fully understand. And then I replied to her saying, listen, I can speak French or English or Luxembourgish, you choose. And I replied to her in Luxembourgish. So eventually she came to me, I can speak English, it's not a problem. And then eventually when the other nurse came, she was speaking to me directly in French, and she stopped the other and said she speaks English or Luxembourgish. And they both were able to speak English with me. So that's exactly what power and privilege is, and how you ensure other voices are heard. So if I had anybody there that had the same difficulties as me, that would struggle to feel included, I would say, and you have to speak English with them too. So you use your power and your privilege to give those voices a seat where you don't need to have the voice. So you don't need to be in this room because you already have a seat there. Mm-hmm. So you take your seat and you give to them.
Because you already have a seat there. This is an amazing, I think, way for you to finish. But however, I do have the last question, which is a bit related to what you've been saying, although it kind of just draws the line below the entire conversation that we've just had, which was like super informative, by the way. Like I feel like I've been maybe at a free consultation on how to deal with inclusion and how to deal with people who do not understand what inclusion is. The bonus question is, what's one stereotype, phrase, or belief about women or inclusion that you wish we could retire forever?
The one that I retired from my vocabulary. So I grew up in Brazil hearing whenever we would see somebody driving that was not according to our own patterns, because driving well, good or bad is depending on our own perception, right? Mm-hmm. And whenever we would see a woman driving, automatically we would say it was obviously a woman, right? And I caught myself thinking and saying that here in Luxembourg after I started working with inclusion. And I used to say that in Brazil all of the time. I wouldn't say I wish we could retire. My wish was that we could realize what we're saying and why we're saying. Mm-hmm. Because when you retire things, you prevent people from being aware of it. It's like having all of those museums about the Second World War, mm-hmm. or all of the exhibitions, right? We should not forget about the past. We should remember how painful it is for someone else.
Yeah.
So that's one phrase that I realized and I stopped using. Or even guys, right? I used to say, hey, you guys, all of the time. Right now, it gives me the cringe because I just got so aware of it that I cannot use it anymore. So
what do you use instead of hey, you guys?
Hi, y'all. Hey, everyone. Yeah. Hi, folks.
Okay, yeah, that's it. I also say hi, y'all. And it's very, like, apparently a Texan thing to say. Like, people hi, from, yeah, hi, y'all.
But there is, from the Psychological American Association, you have a booklet called Inclusive Language. For all the pillars of inclusion, which words should we be using? For example, one thing I have been trying to teach here in Luxembourg is when they say handicap. So handicap is a word that is used in French, and from what I know, is accepted in the French language as such, and probably in other languages as well. In English, is absolutely not okay to use it. When we talk about inclusive language, this is a wording that has been abolished from the English dictionary. So, and some people say special able, beautifully abled. It's disabled. We should be saying the word that is not aggressive. And if you're in doubt, ask the person. Don't try to create a wording that is cuter for you. You are not in the position of the person, so you don't know. Always ask them. So, for example, when I don't know, the first thing I normally ask somebody is, how should I pronounce your name if I don't know? If you think about Chinese people, they always say, this is my Western name because you're unable to mention my name. We learned how to say Tchaikovsky. I mean, Schumacher. I'm sorry, but I think we can learn how to say some Indian and Chinese names.
Yeah, with a bit of effort, yes, I do agree. Well, PATRICIA, that was an absolute pleasure to have you on air with us today.
Thank you.
All the links to PATRICIA's socials and the website is going to be in the description of the episode. Thank you for being with us today.
Enjoy the summer while it lasts.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And dial in soon. We may have something interesting for you next month.
Thank you.